So our next speaker then is Jenny Thatcher, and let me just find Jenny's bio. So, Dr. Jenny Thatcher.
You don't have to read the whole thing.
Oh, no, I've cut a bit of it, but I really like it. I like it. It's lots to say. So Jenny is a sociologist by training. She graduated with a first class honours in sociology from London Metropolitan University, and she has a PhD from the University of East London, funded by the School of Humanities and Social Science PhD scholarship. She's been employed lecturer at the University of London and at Lancaster University, and in 2012 she co-founded the British Sociological Association's Bourdieu Study Group, where she was a co-convener for 6 years. She's been an editorial board member for the Sociological Review and is now on the board of MAI, a new non-hierarchical journal on feminist visual culture, which sounds ace. More recently, Jenny's research interests have focused on taste, aesthetic labour and gender in the service section, and use of participant observation within workplaces to examine these issues. So a fun fact as well about Jenny for everybody: Jenny taught me on the first year of my PhD, and Jenny gave me the most helpful and constructive feedback I've ever had. So that's a nice shout out for you there, Jenny.
Thank you.
So,
okay, well,
I was just going to, do you want me to introduce your paper?
Yeah, sorry.
So Jenny's paper is based on a participant observation of a pub serving a mixed community of affluent professionals and working class people, and it will examine what it takes to be a barmaid in a post-feminist neoliberal society in which they have to become aesthetic entrepreneurs, displaying effective emotional and glamour labour. It will argue that class is central to aesthetic labour, especially feminine self-presentation, and that barmaids often suffer emotional turmoil to deploy the right type of aesthetic labour. In a bar negotiating a mixed clientele, the tasteful consumption habits and the differently classed bodily capital often produces symbolically violent relationships. Yet these barmaids were employed for their feminine characteristics, optimised and exploited by both employer and employee as part of the service and a conflict resolution resource in an alcohol-filled environment where the aesthetics of barmaids were seen as appropriate to elicit unrestricted sexual commentary. So this is going to be fascinating. I'll hand over to you now, Jenny.
Okay, thank you, Kay, for and thank you for the organisers of the conference for putting this together. I know the presentation I'm about to give is actually different from the one that was advertised, and the reason why was I had a participant withdraw last minute from the actual research, so I had to use so I'm using a formal paper because it was easier to withdraw the data that she provided in that from this paper. So my paper is actually entitled Can I Have a Foster's and a Pint of Your Pussy? Because this was a quotation said to a barmaid, and this is about the kind of aesthetic labour of barmaids. So basically I want to start off firstly by saying you know, kind of why I wanted to study pubs. And I've been really inspired by this book. You can see it. That's it, right. So it's The Pub and the People by Mass Observation. It was published in 1943 by Tom Harrison. And he stated in this book, plans are being made about the future of Britain, and these are often being made as if the prejudice and habits of ordinary people can be ignored. He argued that social scientists should not only rely on interviews and surveys for understanding people's views, but that a large section of British society does not write for newspapers or indeed even vote in the general election. And by conducting a participant observation in one of the most basic institutions in British society, the public house, sociologists gain a valuable understanding of human behaviour in everyday surroundings. Also, I've just started reading this book here. Hope you can see this all. This is the Cocktail Waitress, a woman's work in a man's world. It's an anthropological study of bars as well. And they argue that bars offer a unique opportunity to study certain values and norms in society. In particular, social lives in bars revolve around interactions between people, and often a female-male interaction. So the pub is one of the oldest institutions, comes up against difficulties in its own structure, organisation and custom, in which it needs to change rapidly when it encounters competition. The pub has long been known to hold social function in society. Harrison detailed observation, including a human ecology of Worktown, which was a fictional student name, but we now know it was Bolton, found that manual workers spent a similar proportion of their wages in the pub as upper and middle class spent on their private pleasures. He showed how pubs were places of friends as much as they were places of profit, which were dependent upon the participation of people. The pub, like the church, politics, sport and clubs, produced social groups, something incoming cultural activities did not always do, despite people sharing consciously the same experience, because the emphasis was on each individual experiencing it and not as a common feeling or interest. Harrison's mass observation found that the pub was commonly a home away from home. It was an institution which someone belonged to, similar to a political organisation. For myself, circumstances, opportunity and interest came together to spur me on to producing an in-depth participant observation of a traditional London pub to explore in detail the significance of class and gender in the performance of bar work and customer-staff interaction in a post-feminist neoliberal society, as well as the struggle and survival of a traditional London Irish pub in a globalised city facing increasing challenges of displacement of working class residents and struggling during the coronavirus pandemic. It should be noted that I did not take the employment at the pub to conduct a participant observation. My financial situation meant I took the opportunity when offered the job, and upon weeks of working there, I quickly realised it would make an interesting ethnographic exploration of gender and class in a contemporary pub. This was also inspired by my previous ethnographic workplace study I had conducted on the experience of being a sales assistant in a bridal boutique. Again, a job that was taken out of financial necessity after I completed my PhD. I believe that the participatory nature of my involvement within these workplaces produces an in-depth and rich finding that perhaps might not be possible through interviews alone, something Harrison stated about the importance of ethnographic observations in informing sociological research. Sorry, I just need to have a drink. So I'd been working in the pub as a barmaid, doing a number of shifts per week from the 1st of November until the 20th of March, when all pubs in the UK were officially closed due to the coronavirus pandemic. But during the closure period, I actually stayed and continued to live at the pub. So I assisted the landlord on various aspects of the pub in its struggle for survival. And this included opening a takeaway draft beer service in early May, which actually proved to be very popular. My participant observation includes working behind the bar, but also sitting on the other side of the bar on nights off, where I make ethnographic observations. The pub operates with a late license, so I can sometimes be working till 3 o'clock in the morning. So I just want to give you like a bit of background now about the pub. So I decided to do the presentation in the pub so you could kind of get an idea of what the pub's like. The pub is situated in one of the most prosperous parts of London. The area contains some of the most expensive housing in London and is residents to renowned celebrities, a number of whom come from come into the pub for drinks and are on friendly and personal terms with the governor, and they hire the pub out for private parties. Yet the pub itself is also close to a large council estate in the area, and too has many of the clientele from this estate. So the publican himself and many of the staff are working class. Oh, sorry. The pub was taken over by the current governor in 2004, and I called him Danny. This is his pseudonym. He's 55 years of age and has been working in the pub industry for over 35 years. Migrating from Ireland to England in his early 20s, Danny bartended in a number of pubs all over London, where he eventually moved into management. Danny is the embodiment of the respected publican and will often hire additional staff just so he can sit in front of the bar and socialise and engage with the regulars who've come to expect this, and will often indeed go to another pub if he's not around or it's his day off. A fact that Harrison in 1943 had also outlined in his observation of publicans. Danny has taken great pride in renovating the pub when he took it on in 2004. As you can see, the pub has low ceilings with traditional beams and an open log fire. Hops hang around the beams with fairy lights, and the pub is decorated with various vintage Guinness and whiskey signs, such as "Drink more, you are Irish." Danny is keen that the pub not be too pretentious and cater for a mixed clientele, whilst at the same time not alienate the more affluent residents of the area. The immediate area also contains a number of established and regarded gastropubs. This pub is a wet-led pub, so we have no food. The pub itself concentrates on sporting events. Danny rarely advertises for bar staff, except in the case of looking for full-timers. Most bar staff are recruited through informal networks of current or previous barmaids, and a predominant number of them have Irish working class ancestry. Most of the staff are women on a part-time basis with other jobs and family commitments. Like many pubs, we have a high turnover of staff, and Danny will often say to me when recruiting a new member that we need to find someone like ourselves, working class, that will fit into the pub and not be too uptight. Of the other occupations barmaids had, these included an actress, model, musician, event organizer, an academic, a nanny, a carer. A majority of them are from working class backgrounds, but they had a particular trajectory which had endowed them with an aesthetic capital, allowing them to mix comfortably, for the most part, with middle class people. Interestingly, all the barmaids were also physically attractive, with strong personalities, something that was also frequently commented on by customers. So I'm just going to give a bit of background onto aesthetic labour now, kind of what aesthetic labour is. So Rosalind Gill and Angela McRobbie, amongst others, have argued that neoliberalism and post-feminism are central for understanding subjectivity, in which women in particular are embedded within a post-feminist masquerade of free choice and autonomy. This renews institutionalised gender inequality and re-establishes gender hierarchies. As Ellis, I hope I pronounced that right, sorry, have argued, neoliberalism makes us all aesthetic entrepreneurs, and this is very much related to labour, particularly jobs which are productive in engaging with appearance politics. Previous research has also shown the tendencies for organisations to manage the way employees look as well as behave. Aesthetic labour and the feminine presentation is often culturally demanded with work that is associated with women. Such practices often re-entrench job segregation, race, class, and gender discrimination, as well as fetishise consumption. I asked Danny why he had asked me if I was interested in pub work, and he stated, "You carry yourself very well. When I was talking to you, you were very talkative, engaging, so I could see this person behind the bar." Here we see Danny describing a type of aesthetic labour in which a worker already embodies a particular type of habitus that would suit not only the customer service, but resonate with the established clientele. In a job where you are hired to perform aesthetic labour in a specific employment context, social hierarchies can be produced. If a customer deems their business to be hiring workers who look and sound right, then they feel entitled to make aesthetic judgments, including commentary to both the staff members themselves and the manager. I experienced such an interaction with a regular woman customer. The woman was employed in a highly skilled professional job, and she would only drink champagne or wine. Her frustration with me had apparently occurred when I did not know all the names of the different wines when I'd first started. She made a number of comments to the landlord, including insinuations that he'd only hired me because he fancied me, that I was one of the worst barmaids he had had, that he was giving me too much attention and time, and that she could do my job in 10 minutes. I'd really like to see that. This is illustrative of the similar experiences by other barmaids in which the physical aesthetics seems acceptable and open to public scrutiny by both women and male customers. Of course, commentary by male customers could often take a more sexualized, flirtatious, and harassing manner. This was often spoken about by the barmaids to each other. So in Valerie Hayes' book, which is great if you've not read it, Patriarchy and Pub Culture, she argues that it exists in popular culture and practice conceptions that pubs, for the most part, are male enclaves, and that individual women who enter them are therefore after only one thing. This is often rooted in the cultural expectations of Victorian society and ideologies of appropriate masculinity and femininity, with working class notions of masculinity grounded in drinking culture. Hayes goes on to argue that historically, working class pubs in their roles as female substitutes offered warmth, food and companionship, a servicing of male needs. Indeed, publicans often historically played a role in supplying prostitutes to male clients. And while working class males were incited to indulge drinking and satisfying of their sexual appetite, women of the same class became increasingly subject to supervision of their enjoyment. So Maeve is a 54-year-old woman and has 35 years experience as a barmaid. She migrated from Ireland to London in the 1980s when she was 18 years old and started working in bars as a singer and a barmaid. She worked predominantly in Irish bars in an area of London with a large Irish community and describes it as being some of the hardest work she'd had to do, mainly because she had to deal with older Irish men that still held outdated patriarchal views about women and repeatedly sexually harassed her. She came from a small village in Ireland and spoke about having to survive and singing for her breakfast, supper and dinner. Maeve is eccentric in her style of makeup and clothes, with long bleached platinum hair to her waist, brightly coloured lipstick, eyeshadow and nails, and numerous outfits with glitter and sequins embellishments, combined with an outspoken, friendly personality. She was often requested by certain customers to have them serve her. Maeve had shown us photographs of herself when she was younger. She was very attractive with long copper hair. She spoke about the sexual harassment she encounters as a barmaid and as a pub singer, even being told that if she wanted one job, she had to perform oral sex. Frequently, she related this to the public perception of the so-called sexual promiscuity of barmaids. Maeve saw a lot of the problems barmaids face as being down to the bad reputation they have in the public imaginary, and this is what Maeve says. Barmaids have a really bad name because I don't know why. I really don't understand. They think we're easy. They think we are like, you're just a barmaid. You're just a barmaid. I'm a fucking mother. I'm a fucking housekeeper. I pay my fucking mortgage. I pay my rent. I do this. I do that. And you tell me I'm just a fucking barmaid? Kiss my fucking hairy ass. I work my bollocks off to pay my mortgage all my life, man. The thought of my son not having a roof over his head. I go out and I clean shit out of the toilet in the early hours of the morning to make ends meet. I go out and I do what I have to do in the day. I work as a barmaid. And then at night I sing. Yeah, I sing for my supper. Yeah. In the mythologizing of pubs, barmaids have been created as an object of desire to the masculine gaze. The barmaid is a sexualized identity produced by pub culture. It was the temperance movement of the early 19th century that created the symbolic barmaid. In temperance literature, Diane Kirby points out that the barmaid became symbolic for the consumption of alcohol, and so her sex became an issue around the debate of liquor reform. Men's desire for alcohol was conflated into men's desire for the person serving the alcohol because of her sex, which became her sexuality. Alcohol consumption, women's sexuality, and licensing all became combined, and as such, removing the barmaid from the pub became symbolic in the campaign against drink traders. In the Victorian era, so-called respectable women were portrayed as discouraging men to drink, whereas bad women would encourage it. Hence, working as a barmaid jeopardized a woman's virtue and was deemed as inappropriate work for a woman to do. The creation of the barmaid's sexual allure has been portrayed historically in illustrations, poems, art, film, TV. The barmaid is associated with sexual immorality in the public imaginary, which has been hard to displace and still remains today. Hay also argues that given the uncompromising masculinity of pubs, the barmaid's acceptability is a complex phenomenon in which the public cultural imaginary constructs the image of a sexual provocateur, friendly, sympathetic, experienced women. Barmaids are the token classic woman. The fact is that bar work is and always has been labour intensive, in which women have traditionally been paid less than men. Women have performed skills of femininity behind the bar, but have also performed the economic and power features of sexual difference. And while barmaids are woven into pub culture, they are not viewed as workers in the same right as men. Their labour is invisible. And rather than portrayed as objects, they are portrayed as objects of desire to the male gaze. Indeed, all service industry occupation requires a certain level of aesthetic labour, but sexualized eroticizing of the barmaid has been an enduring portrayal, which may often lead barmaids to experience a high level of inappropriate customer service interaction. Therefore, barmaids have had to develop defences against this behaviour to protect themselves. So in conclusion, I have highlighted some of the emerging themes that have occurred within this ongoing ethnography, including the particulars of aesthetic labour and what it means for gender inequality within a post-feminist neoliberal society, the unwarranted sexual harassment and sexual betrayal of barmaids, the social responsibility of the pub to its staff in an alcohol-filled environment. The pub is the pub is a social institution whose function has been undermined, unchanged for hundreds of years. It is often the simplest way for people to spend their leisure hours. Yet these leisure hours are being determined by changing working patterns, which pose challenges for the traditional pub. And although the mythologizing of the sexualized barmaid is very much ingrained within the public imaginary, it is still open to reinterpretation.
Thank you very much. That's brilliant, Jenny. So much to unpick there. and so much, I think, that so Sharon was saying something interesting in the chat about how, again, this is raising those sort of unspoken about issues.
Sorry, one second. The publican's actually interviewing someone at the moment, and I can't hear what you're saying. Just one.
Don't worry, this is good. It's all real life stuff. Yeah, so I'll hang on a sec, and hopefully Jenny will come back. But I think that's really interesting, that idea of stories sort of weaving its way throughout the presentations today, and all those sort of
Sorry, that was the problem of going down to the pub. So sorry about that. What were you saying, Kay?
No, it's great. It's like live action. No, we were just talking about how there's almost a sort of putting water on the web and sort of showing up all of these issues that we kind of know about, but are very much unspoken, and that's sort of weaving its way, I think, through all the presentations today. I think there's a few questions coming in. There was one I was just interested in, and this might be my own bias, I don't know, feel free to disagree. I was interested in, again, talking about the pandemic and the way that things have been opening up, and how the sort of opening up of pubs and other things that have been mainly sort of masculine pursuits in a way, so football, horses, pubs, all of those kind of things. And I know there's something about the balancing of the economy and the fact that we need to get things going again, and for people like yourself in these professions. But I wondered what you thought about that, whether there's a sense of prioritizing of those kind of male.
Well, that's really interesting, because if as I said, like in the hospitality industry, and I was looking at a news report yesterday, because I used to be a beauty therapist as well for years, and I'm seeing how beauty salons have actually been quite neglected in the consideration of the reopening of the economy. And it just shows you where women are placed, especially working class women, tradeswomen. Because I say beauty therapy is a trade. I went to college for 2 years, and I was told I wasn't a manual worker when I put myself down as a manual worker in my first sociology class. And I had to do a survey, but definitely it was. But I think often it's kind of neglected, because actually, as I said, bar work is mainly, in hospitality work, is mainly done by women. So the reopening of that, although it's seen, but then it's seen as like a male leisure pursuit, but it's actually economically for women, it's essential for them. Did I answer that? Sorry, I'm struggling to hear at the moment as well.
I was just thinking, yeah, that's a big point. And I suppose it's all these things that sort of appear like something on the surface, but when you actually are inside the industry, you know differently. And I suppose I was also thinking about the way there's been restrictions on opening the industry, doing facial or eyelashes or anything like that, while at the same time men can have their bit trimmed. So there's all these kind of interesting.
I know, and again, I know this isn't related to this presentation, but I've got years of experience of working in a salon, and I'll tell you, most salons will make their money from facial treatments. So to be told that they can't do that, especially eyelash, facial, all the different types of facial things that you can do, will be a big hit on them, and they will probably be considering whether they should open up at all. And again, it's something that's going to affect mainly women. And I was listening to the head of, I think she's part of some kind of head of beauty association in Britain, and she was saying that often women's work is regarded as a hobby, like in terms of like working in the beauty industry, hospitality, or as a second kind of wage to supplement the family. The men is the main, but actually a lot of the barmaids I work with are single, you know, they're not married and they're surviving by themselves. So this is an essential source. It's their main source of income.
Yeah, really interesting. And I think it is those things that don't often get talked about. We've got a question from Chloe, who said, love the presentation, Jenny. I was wondering if and how you experience sharing your findings with your employer. So Chloe's done research on gender and karate, and the gender dynamic of sharing findings has been really interesting. So have you experienced that?
Yeah, so the employer, so the publican is really uninterested. I did my presentation to him last night, and he actually said to me, "Oh, there's a few things you're not mentioning in there, Jenny, including all the arguments you've had with different bar staff." And I was like, so, but in general, he's kind of. I said, "But do you think it's like a good reflection of the pub?" And he was like, "Yeah." But this is about my experience, and this is why one of the participants withdrew, actually, because this is why I had to change the presentation. Because she was kind of she wasn't kind of happy with my findings. I share this, and she didn't feel it was a reflection of her experience. But I said, this is my experience, and so she wanted to withdraw from that, and that's fine, fair enough. So yeah, I think you always have to be mindful, and we know all the time research, especially sociology and ethnography, is subjective. And often the training that you've been given or the education that you've been given can make you look at things very differently to how another person might look at it. But at the same time, you don't disregard their feelings and their experience and how they perceive that to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. There's a question from Moira as well that's interesting, and I think it's kind of thinking about change and what's changed and what hasn't. So she says, it appears that stereotypes overlap and outlast generational change in other worlds. What do you think mainly influences their tenure in the pub?
I think still, like, if you still look at the kind of, I don't know, you can watch TV and popular culture, the barmaid is still there's still a kind of stereotype of what a barmaid is, and I think you see that all around. I mean, yeah, I don't know what the changes are, but sometimes I've spoken to a lot of barmaids who have like a more authoritarian approach to dealing with people, and this comes from being experienced and having 20 or 30 years, and sometimes they'll be called the landlady rather than the barmaid or the bar staff, and it's just I think it's just kind of ingrained within the public imaginary of that's what. But you have to remember, this is a very small London Irish pub, so it's a very kind of, it's also a very working class pub, although we do cater for the affluent clients. But interestingly, with the clients that do come here, that are living in the, you know, expensive houses, you will find there will be some generation of kind of working class roots there as well. So they feel more comfortable in this bar in comparison to maybe the more gastro pubs that are near us. So there's all those kind of dynamics going on at the moment.
And I suppose the fact that it's not a food serving pub, so there's more
the wet-led pub, yeah. It's football, it's, you know, it's Irish, it's
yeah, that's really interesting. And there was just a last thing I was going to pick up on that Adele mentioned in the chat that I thought was really interesting in relation to gender and class, and she was saying about how sexism and the things that you've talked about, the kind of really blatant things that go on in a pub, can be how easy to call out, whereas when it happens, say, in academia or, you know, in middle class spaces, you can feel it, but you can't always object to it because it's really insidious.
Well, you can't object to it in a pub, because I never, there was a part of my presentation I skipped over actually, but that's where one customer that was repeatedly sexually harassing bar staff, female bar staff, and he was actually barred because the publican's very good on that. So he will do it, but a lot of the bar staff didn't reveal that they'd been sexually harassed by this customer until he'd been barred. And then when I interviewed them and I said, well, why didn't you tell Danny about this, you know? And they said, oh, because we didn't want to be seen as being difficult, and it's part and parcel of So it's like they're scared to call it out because they feel like in other bars that they've worked in, they're told that's part of your job, get on with it. So you can't really call it out. I think there's more policies in place where, I know academia is horrific, but there's more policies in place where if you were, there's more kind of formal policies and routes that you can go through, although you probably won't get the necessary satisfactory outcome that you should deserve. But it's much harder. It's like you just deal with it. Like I've been told, just deal with it. And I've said some, you know, as I said, one of the paper is called can I have a Foster's and a pint of your pussy, because that's what one customer said to one of the barmaids.
Yeah.
And I was told as a new barmaid, someone turned around to another person and said, oh, the new barmaid's nice, I bet she gives a good blowjob, you know. And I just had to stand there and take that. Could you imagine that in academia?
Yeah.
So
yeah. So yeah, one extreme to the other. And it must be really interesting for you, Jenny, then to compare those very different worlds, I guess. What are you doing next then with your research?
Well, I'm concentrating, so I'm just going to edit the paper I'd written originally about what was happening over lockdown, so to survive all the government schemes we had to go through, the hoops, the actual nightmare that made it look easy. They made it look, they stood on television and it looked like they were giving the hospitality industry loads of money. Again, like the Chancellor stood up, I think it was last week, and he said he was reducing VAT to 5%. That's only for food, so that's not for alcohol. And as a wet-led pub, that means nothing to us. So we get no reduction at all. The end of September, we've got no rent reduction. So this pub will owe £30,000 in rent. And we've been closed for 15 weeks. So it's with no income and all the bills and overheads over it. So I'm really going to write about the kind of survival, but also I don't want to lose sight of the fact that this is a very working class pub in an affluent area, and you know, what does it have to do to survive? So I'm going to be concentrating on that.
Brilliant. Well, we look forward to reading and hearing more of your findings then. So thank you very much, Jenny. That was brilliant.
Thank you everyone for listening.
Yeah, it was great. Really, really good.